Welcome to the Mason Guard Show. Unscripted, uncensored, unapologetic. Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the Mason Guard Show. I'm Scott Mason.
And I'm Ed Guard.
And we are back once more with Does It Hold Up? Where we look at movies from 15 or more years ago and decide with a 2019 mindset if they are still worth rewatching for you out there in the audience. And do we have a treat for you today?
We are looking today at the legendary Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy from 2004.
Just coming in under that 15-year line that we do have.
June 28th, 2004. It still makes the cut.
Absolutely. We were really excited to do this one. We did have a poll a while back where this one went up against Office Space, and Office Space won, but we had a lot of people saying that they did also still want to see Anchorman. So we threw it into the lineup pretty quickly to make sure that you guys, our fans, are happy.
And this is our show, so we're going to do whatever we want.
So let's talk a little bit about Anchorman, as you say, released in 2004, directed by Adam McKay, written and directed by Will Ferrell and Adam McKay, I should say, wrote the script, directed specifically by Adam McKay, and man, this movie really changed comedy, I think, in many ways, right?
I absolutely agree. This is one of those ones that just was so funny and unexpected. When I watched it originally, if we're going to jump right into before we press play, the first time I watched it, I just laughed so hard. I mean, this is one of the first ones for me, this and Step Brothers, that really made Will Ferrell a star to me.
Right.
And I just, I laughed hysterically at this movie. There's just so much funny stuff in this movie.
I believe this is one of those movies that goes down, in the debate for most quotables.
Oh, yeah, many quotes just come into, regular conversation for me. Yeah. I'm sure we'll go into conversation like that in the script and everything, but, yeah, this is one of those ones that's just... Every scene has got something funny in it.
And I think a key point there is in everyday life, you can use a lot of the quotes from this movie. And I think that's part of what's helped it stand this test of time and still be so well regarded, in the comedy world. So let's jump into some fun facts. I think other casting is always one that we find very, very interesting, as well as could have played some of these roles. So in the original script, they did have names attached to some of the various roles that... Man, again, I think we're talking a very different movie if it had gone this way. So Champ Kind, originally listed for John C. Reilly.
So that's a funny one, because he almost feels like he's missing from this movie, right?
With the Will Ferrell we've seen now, yeah. It does feel like it's missing that John C. Reilly bit. He's actually gone on record saying he regrets turning this down because he just thought it looked like so much fun to do.
I think he was doing The Aviator at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah.
Which, it's hard to turn down, working with Leo and stuff like that.
I think at that time he still didn't realize that he was going to be a comedian, and this was that was his role in life.
It's actually why I love John C. Reilly. He bounces back and forth so easily. It's amazing. But moving on, Brick was going to be Chris Parnell, who does of course still show up in this movie, but. Man, I you can't replace Steve Carell for me. There's no way. It is Steve Carell's charm that makes Brick Tamland work.
Oh, for sure. He's just so great in this movie. It almost underplays Steve Carell. Like, he doesn't get to be his regular sort of awkward
He's no Michael Scott.
Yeah, but he still delivers this one amazingly well.
He really does. Brian Fontana was originally going to be Ben Stiller. Also auditioning for it was Ron Livingston, which I thought was fun from Office Space. I thought that was a weird tie-in to our poll. But again, I don't think I like either of them compared to Paul Rudd.
Yeah, he does a great job too.
And then for Veronica Corningstone, Maggie Gyllenhaal.
I could see that.
I like her. I think she's fantastic. But I am absolutely on a big kick for, Miss Veronica Corningstone herself. Like, she's just really winning me over these days. And rewatching this movie, she absolutely slays me.
Yeah, she crushed this one. I found it funny that Will Ferrell actually graduated college with a degree in journalism. So, like, that's the direction he wanted to go. He actually anchored a local news station a few times before he even got his start into comedy.
That's fantastic.
Crazy.
Have you seen any of the bits where he's gone on local news now as Ron Burgundy? Like,
yeah, it's so great.
Like,
I tried to find some actual clips of him doing it for real. I couldn't find anything. If anyone ever comes across that, send it my way, because I just love to see him.
I want to see real Will
that.
Ferrell newscast.
I also found it amazing that there's so much extra footage in this film that they actually made a second film, which is the Lost movie, before Anchorman 2, which I found great.
I love that. Have you seen it? I have never been able to find it at a time when I've been looking for it. I know it's out there, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, I remember watching it. I don't remember too much from it. I feel like I cross over between all of the outtakes and the extra stuff that is included in this movie. If you look it up, there's just so much of it. I also found it crazy that Amy Poehler's role in this movie was just completely cut.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Amy Poehler was supposed to be in this movie, but that's pretty impressive to cut out an entire role. Which, again, though, they cut out an entire movie, so
that's true.
I guess that's what happens when you do have an improv movie like this, right? Obviously, a lot of this, they just turned the camera on and just had people deliver line after line after line after line after line, trying different reads, different takes.
Yeah, I was reading that the sort of final decisions on what were made, like what made the movie, were so difficult, because often for some of the funny lines, there was like 20 plus versions of things that they said that were just so funny, and they kind of narrowed it down to the best of them.
That's got to be a tough job, to be the editor and having to trim down Steve Carell's funniest delivery of "I Love Lamp."
Yeah.
This was made on a budget of $26 million and did fairly well worldwide, made $90 million. So that is, again, obviously a win. Not a big, smash hit or anything like that. It's not, making waves, but certainly something to sing about, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the opening weekend for the movie made $28 million. So right off the bat, it was a success. But $90 million overall is still a success on a movie. Like, we're talking $60+ million in profits. Not a bad day.
No, not at all. Most of that is domestic. It's only $5 million international, so I imagine it probably even opened up only in a couple of different markets. So that would be interesting to see. I wish I had looked that up. Is where that actually opened up to make that $5 million. Anything else you want to jump into? Any other fun facts that you learned before we jump into our review here?
Not too much. Again, I shared sort of how, first time I saw this movie, I thought it was hilarious. How about you? What before pressing play, what did you remember? Have you seen this one recently?
Like you said, I just remember laughing my head off. That's what I recall. I haven't seen it probably in 5, 6, 7 years. I think it's probably been.
In the same boat. It's been a while, but I think that I watched it quite a few times when it initially came out.
Yes, yeah, it's certainly. I would say probably in 10 to a dozen kind of plays for me. I will say I was worried because again, I know we look at progressiveness, and I remember a lot of misogyny from this movie.
That's basically the entire.
I really expected this to not hold up in that regard. And when we get to progressiveness, I'm very interested to share how that view shifted throughout watching this movie. But why don't we jump into it as we go with story is always our first category, story, script, performances. We talk about that. And I do want to talk, obviously we do a little summary of the plot, which in this movie, a plane load of news anchors crash in the mountains after a mid-air collision with another plane. This one, however, was carrying monkeys and martial arts equipment. What follows is the ultimate showdown of monkey versus men. Newsmen. Cannibalistic newsmen. Now, those of you out there are probably wondering what the hell I've been smoking, because that's obviously not the actual plot to the movie Anchorman that we all saw and we all love. However, the fun fact, that was the original script for this movie. That was the plot that this movie was originally going to take.
So obviously this movie's ridiculous, but can you imagine that movie?
I want to see that. I would absolutely pay good money to watch that movie as well. And it's funny because I think it leads to one of the more iconic scenes, which of course we'll touch on, which is the big brawl. I think was obviously something that they had written in, was just this concept of all these different news teams having to come together and have this big giant fight. So I love that. I would have loved to have seen that movie. That said, I still very much enjoy the movie we get, which, Ed, maybe want to describe the real plot for those out there who haven't seen it.
This is following a local news anchor, and not even like a network news anchor, but a local news anchor, your Channel 4 anchor, and his sort of team, and then the introduction of a female anchor at the time, which is, I guess, they don't clarify, but it's set in the 70s.
I looked at
questionable things there.
Based on the references. Most guesses put it late 1977.
Oh, good. Okay, so you've narrowed that one down.
Yep.
And obviously, it's a struggle between the male anchor of the time accepting a female anchor, and that's the story there.
That really is basically what it boils down to: is the acceptance of this female personality into their boys' club of the news team. So, Ed, what did you think this time around when it came to the story script? Is it ridiculous? Does it work in a 2019 setting?
I still think it does. There's so much commentary here about, the struggle that, females have had in that industry and every other industry. But, when I really think about this story and this script, it's just all about the script and the funny lines that come out of people's mouths. Like, I don't want to just go through a list of all the quotes in this, but there are a few that we need to talk about.
We'd basically be doing a 90-minute redo of
the
entire
Let's
movie.
Just read this script.
So yeah, I mean, obviously there's a bunch of lines that jump out. Steve Carell as Brick Tamlin always slayed me. He was one of my personal favorites growing up. Loved that he was still just as funny now. I think it's an interesting take for me now that I have fallen in love with The Office, because back in 2004, I didn't know The Office even at all. So Steve Carell was fresh take for me now, but seeing him in this one was just, again, absolutely hilarious, because he's very different, obviously, than the Michael Scott character.
Oh, for sure. Brick's delivery of lines like, I don't know what we're yelling about.
Loud noises!
Or, I love lamp. Just so many amazing lines from him, just so random. The thing that, the way they describe him, the way they introduce themselves at the beginning, are so good. So I found so many funny pieces of this script. I mean, the story is pretty basic overall.
Of course.
But it comes down to just each and every scene has something worth laughing about. I love scotch. Just
that
so
entire warm-up bit, I think, is where some of the most memorable lines come from. That's where maybe don't wear a bra next time. Scotch. What are his vocal warm-ups? I wish I'd written some of them down.
Brown cow. Or the arsonist had oddly shaped feet.
Just fantastic stuff in there. And again, I feel like all you have to do is sit down, point a camera at Will Ferrell and say, go.
And he's just going to throw stuff out. I mean, it's like that through the whole movie. There's so many iconic lines that get, jokes are made consistently. Like when he actually introduces himself to the character of Veronica Corningstone. Yeah. I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal. People know me. I have many leather-bound books, and my apartment smells of rich mahogany.
Smells of rich mahogany is what gets me.
So good. And then, I know that you have a love for Baxter, so I almost want to leave this part to you, but the initial conversation with Baxter is just amazing.
Absolutely, whether it's calling him a miniature hairy Buddha, pooped in the refrigerator, or, of course, the iconic ate the whole brick of cheese.
Yeah, and what comes with that, the joke that comes up so consistently from this movie is, I'm actually not even mad. That's amazing.
There's a quote I use in everyday life all the time. I'm not even mad. That's incredible. I love it. Oh, man, again, I feel like I'm falling into the trap of just seriously wanting to quote some of my favorite lines. Brick's invitation to the pants party and how awkward that whole scene plays out.
And then he just runs off and falls down. I'm okay.
I like to imagine that wasn't scripted and then that Steve Carell just fell off on the set and played it off to be great, or he's riding a furry tractor. If I'm going to try to steer this ship a little bit, one of the things, I never really was big on Champ or Brian Fantana, maybe the first time around. Certainly there's some laughs in there. Sex Panther, right?
Yeah.
60% of the time it works every time.
There's real parts of Panther.
There's chunks of real Panther in it. But this time around, I really came to love Paul Rudd's performance, and I think it's because he's so different than the Paul Rudd I'm now used to.
See, I think that I had a similar sort of experience. Like, I already knew Steve Carell when I watched this movie. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know Paul Rudd that well at this point. So
yeah, he hadn't done much outside of Friends.
Yeah, so I don't think I was paying real close attention to Paul Rudd's lines, because the first time I was watching, I was just dying at everything everyone else was saying. But yeah, his scene with the Sex Panther is just so good.
It's really fantastic, but again, right now, if we look at 2019 and I ask you to describe every Paul Rudd role, you're going to say the nice guy, the sweet guy, maybe, our idiot brother kind of, dumb innocence.
So he's kind of one of those ones like Jason Bateman for me, where Paul Rudd's just kind of Paul Rudd.
Playing Paul Rudd, right? But you can't say that about Brian Fantana. Brian Fantana is a sleazeball, and so I found it really weird to watch Paul Rudd play this character. But man, does he absolutely kill it. And I think, again, it's that freedom where he wasn't pigeonholed into the Paul Rudd type, and he was allowed to kind of be free and invent this comic character. So it almost made me miss old Paul Rudd, because, again, I just feel he has been pigeonholed into playing Paul Rudd. Even Ant-Man, right? He's playing a superhero, but he's basically just Paul Rudd in a suit,
Ant-Man, yeah.
So this was just so nice to see Paul Rudd getting to play something a little bit different for me.
Yeah. Obviously, other parts of the story that, there's obviously the fight, which is amazing. And a line that I probably say on a regular basis is, "That escalated quickly," which is from this movie. Just so fantastic.
See, and I find myself saying I killed the man with a trident.
Oh yeah, we talked about you being a murderer previously. Go fuck yourself, San Diego. And and one of my favorite moments in the movie is when he's drinking milk on it, and he's like,
yes.
"It's so damn hot. Milk was a bad choice." Just so funny. At the end of the day, this is a comedy. It's all about the script. It's all about the delivery, and that's really what you get here. This isn't like there's no groundbreaking story here. There's no crazy twists that blow your mind. But when we're talking about story script, if we're going to talk about this, it's all about the script, and these comedians do such a fantastic job.
Absolutely, I love the prank phone calls when they're in the office trying to call her. It's your doctor, Dr. Chim Richards.
We met you. You probably don't remember.
Which again, I just feel I want to have been sitting on that set and watching them, because I got to imagine they probably had 40 of those fake phone calls.
Oh, for sure.
And we got to see 2.
And then when he hangs up, how did it go? I think she bought it.
I think she bought it. That line slays me every time. Oh, I absolutely love it. Again, we could go on forever. I feel like we could just fall into just quoting and quoting and quoting trap. Let's see. I know negatives are something for you. What do you have on the negative side?
Again, I'd have to talk about the fact that this is not really story heavy. No. There's nothing here that blows my mind from a story. There's no surprises. There's nothing of that nature. So if you're looking for something other than just fun and laughs, you're not getting it out of this movie.
I think that's fair, but I think if you're looking for that from this movie, you've gone to the wrong movie. This is not certainly what this movie is made for. If I'm going to call out a couple weaknesses, I think the worst line of the movie goes to Chris Parnell, who I, again, normally really like Chris Parnell, but what he calls out Ron in his poop mouth, you stupid poop mouth. I hate that delivery. It's irked me every single time from the very first time I watched this movie. And people like this line, and I just don't get it. I don't understand why that makes anyone laugh. It feels
It's funny because you mentioned that, because when I watched it this time, I saw it and it just felt awkward. It felt like they were just trying to give him a moment, to be funny, but it just wasn't.
Yeah, because Parnell really didn't have any laughs up until that point. And again, he didn't really have many laughs after that point, if you're asking me. But I guess you're right, that they were probably looking to kind of give him a moment. And then I think the other part that I want to call out is, I think the famous line where San Diego means a whale's vagina. And I don't think that's a very good line at all. Because as we all know, a whale's vagina in German is die Vagina ein Wals. Right? We all know that.
I don't even know where we go. Do we just stop recording now? I don't, where do we go from here?
After we do actually bust out the German for whale's vagina? I don't know.
Okay, let me ask you. How long did it take to learn that?
Longer than I'd like to admit. I put way too much time on Google Translate just pushing the pronunciation button over and over and over again.
I'm impressed, though. It sounds legitimate.
Thank you.
You might have just made it up also.
For our one German fan that we do have, we know you're out there. We've seen you listening on our statistics. Let us know how horribly I mangled that, or hopefully maybe even give me some props.
Amazing. So let's move into this. Scott, score for story and script.
Okay, so if I were to do this based off just the story, you're right, this is a 1 or 2, it's nothing mind-blowing or original, but the dialogue and how funny it still is after all these years, I gotta give it a 3.5.
3.5, that's amazing, because that's exactly what I went with. It is a great comedy, it just lacks some story value.
I think that's fair. So let's move on to aesthetic. Now, when it comes to the aesthetic of this movie, again, it's a comedy. It's not trying to do anything groundbreaking. So there's not, shots that I'm like, oh, I love how this, relayed the theme of this or anything deep with this movie. So I don't have a lot when it comes to aesthetic. Again, they point the camera and said, guys, do your thing. And obviously it works for this movie, but I don't know what to talk about when it comes to the aesthetic here.
So I had a couple things that, some scenes that I found really funny. And this one I really noticed, and I'm just going to jump into a random place in the movie. The scene where Will Ferrell's running back to get to the station, and he's at full sprint and just slams that guy into the ground. Like, that just caught me completely off guard, and I just laughed about that. There's obviously lots of other scenes I found really funny throughout it. That, after Ron sort of left the group, or when Veronica joins the group and they're doing the photo shoot.
The photo, that was one of the ones I had noted.
They're all looking away and trying to get at random times. It's just so
well done.
Yeah.
Really played well. The way the four of them were synced. I'm very curious to know if there was someone on set like making a noise or something, because the way they do sync is really incredible for that. I also wanted to call out Christina Applegate's face right after Ron says, "Go fuck yourself, San Diego." It's what actually makes me laugh the most about the scene. Like, the line is great, but her face when she's like, oh my god, he actually did it. Like, you could tell up until that moment she didn't believe this was going to happen, and then sure enough.
Yeah, that's probably the most memorable scene from the whole movie as well.
I think I'd argue that.
Well,
because I think we should touch on the Rumble, right?
Let's talk about
the Rumble, because of course here we have all the cameos. You have Tim Robbins, Ben Stiller, Luke Wilson, Vince Vaughn. I did learn Ben Stiller was nominated for a Razzie for his role in this movie, which it really is one of the worst. If you guys remember, he's the Mexican news, and it's just, an offensive stereotype style performance. That is certainly something that does not age well.
Yeah, no, that was... But, I mean, it was...
But the rest of it...
It was all fantastic.
Cool.
And, I mean, after the fact... I stabbed someone in the heart. That was so good. There were horses and a man on fire, and I killed a guy with a trident.
Rick, where did you get a hand grenade?
It's just so funny. It's like, I don't know. That was such a great scene. Very memorable. Like, it's just unexpected that would happen in that movie, and that's the one thing that kind of surprises you as the movie goes on. I mean, Vince Vaughn's character in this movie is very unusual, and you would just not...
His name is Wes Mantooth. Let's give credit credit to one of the greatest names in a comedy movie ever. Wes Mantooth, or of course his mother, Dorothy Mantooth, who was a saint.
Yeah. That was another great script piece. Apparently that was homage to another story as well, but I'm going to take Dorothy Mantooth out for a nice seafood dinner, and then I'm never going to call her again. Just so random, but so funny as well.
I learned Tim Robbins took this role at a very low pay rate. This one, and actually High Fidelity as well, on the promise that they were going to make him a custom wig that he'd get to keep at the end. And as of 2019, apparently he still has both of the wigs from this movie and High Fidelity, which again, I love his hair in this one. He's got the super curls going on. Yeah. And then in High Fidelity, he's got like the man pony, like the super ponytail. So I love the fact that Tim Robbins did this movie for a wig.
I honestly, basically, right? But when you're that kind of star, like I imagine you're just like, throw me in a role. And he does such a great job with it. I also found out that the Adam McKay obviously does his cameo as a custodian.
Yeah, Judd Apatow as well.
And Adam McKay's daughter also does a cameo in this one. She's the little girl that gives him shit, like Ron Burgundy shit after he gets fired. Yeah, I thought that was cute and fun that he was able to put his little daughter in the movie.
Yeah, there are people I forgot were in this movie. Seth Rogen, I completely forgot, because again, I think back in 2004, I may not have known who Seth Rogen was. I don't think I'd watched Freaks and Geeks yet, so...
Yeah, he plays such a small part of the cameraman. He doesn't even get any funny lines or anything, really.
No, he's just there.
And Jack Black showing up as the biker, just like he's on screen for 1 minute to kick Baxter off a bridge.
I remember that. Actually, he's one of my problems. I didn't call this out in the script because he has one of the only anachronisms of the movie where he says something that wouldn't be said in 1970, I imagine, because he says brosif.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, ooh, that feels awkward. But also, Danny Trejo and Fred Armisen. A couple other people I completely forgot were in this movie. Fred Armisen, of course, plays the restaurant owner who calls him up to play the jazz flute. And then Danny Trejo is the bar owner at the end. I love his little cameo in it because, I don't know, anytime that man shows up, I'm usually having a good time in the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many funny ones in this movie, just people randomly dropping in, which were fun. Another funny thing is when all the girls go out to a restaurant. It's a Spanish restaurant. The name of that restaurant, translated to English, is "I spit in your food." That was funny. But there was a few. You mentioned that there was a few things that didn't stand out for a 70s movie. I noticed that there's a lot of cars in the background that weren't from the 70s.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Some of the cologne that's in his cologne shelf are like from the 90s. Yeah. Things like that. If you nitpick, there are things that throw that off.
Sure.
But, for this story, I thought I would leave them out, but here we are again, me just picking shit apart.
What else do we have you around for, Ed, if not to find the little nitpicks? All right, so I think that brings us to the end of what I want to talk about for aesthetic. Do you have any last points you wanted to give before we jump into a score for this?
No, not really. I think that Ron Burgundy's license plate, "I'm number one," was fantastic.
Of course,
just from that. The fight scenes were great. The fight scene between Ron Burgundy and Veronica was great when he actually throws her over the desk and she hits him with the typewriter and then whips him with the antenna. I just thought that scene was fantastic.
Actually, I didn't realize how many fight scenes were in this movie. It was something I didn't realize. Of course, then they also fight bears at the end of it. So yeah. I think that's something we gotta call out as pretty fantastic. Okay, so where did you land for aesthetic? Again, not a lot for me. What about for you?
I'm gonna give this a very generous 3.
Oh wow, that is generous for you.
Really, there are some funny scenes, and I still think that the physical comedy in this one was enough for me to really enjoy watching it. And I guess it's just Will Ferrell doing his thing. Every scene I found funny, and if you're able to make basically every scene in a movie funny, something gets credit to the aesthetic. So I'm giving it a 3.
All right. I think that is probably generous. I think, some of the script points are rubbing off in there. I land on a 2 because, again, there are a couple funny visual jokes, but not a lot. This is a movie that rests more heavily on the dialogue and the performances from the characters. So I think aesthetically, again, a 2. Again, especially because you mentioned those anachronisms that I didn't even notice. I can't give this any more credit than that.
That's fair.
Let's move on to our third category, and this is soundtrack. Now, Ed, I feel like I already know what you're going to say. We've discussed it many times. You're looking for an anthem.
I'm always looking for an anthem in a movie. I always want something to play when I hear it again, that it's going to remind me of a movie. That's something that I'm always looking for.
And what do you think about Anchorman?
There really isn't something that you can just be like, that's Anchorman.
I knew you were going to say that. And I came prepared, because I have an argument that there is a song that if you hear this song, you cannot help but think of Anchorman. And of course, I'm talking about... So exciting.
Whoop. Afternoon delight. Okay. All right. So you're not wrong. Sort of. If that song was playing anywhere where I was listening, I would probably not be listening for too much longer. But you're right. If that song somehow came across, I would think of Anchorman.
You're immediately thinking of 4 dudes in suits singing it. And that to me is a scene where I don't even understand why I laugh at it, but I do. I can't stop laughing at that entire scene, at these 4 super masculine dudes just rocking into this 70s love ballad.
I love that their version is actually better than
than what I just played for you. I think for me, what really kills me is they have the dialogue in the middle of it.
Yeah, and you stop
and then go back to one last afternoon delight. Sorry for everyone's ears out there. I should not have attempted to sing that.
The only other bits I had for soundtrack was at the nightclub when Ron plays the jazz flute, which is actually a throwback to Jethro Tull.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about that was that there's in the song Aqualung, there's actually no flute at all, which I found funny. I also think it's great that Will Ferrell played the flute since elementary school, so he can actually play the flute. I don't think that he's actually playing that, but he can play
in
the
that
flute.
moment. I did not know that.
Yeah, he also plays the drums. He's like a strangely talented guy.
Pretty awesome. Will Ferrell.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously the only other major one for me, I know that there's music throughout this movie, but I always love that they throw in a nice credits song. And in this one, it's Carry On My Wayward Son, which I found fantastic. Whenever that song comes on, I just love it, right?
Yeah.
But that was basically Afternoon Delight, Jazz Flute, and Carry On My Wayward Son. That's all I really had for the soundtrack.
I guess so. I think it's one where it doesn't stand out, but each of the songs that they choose work really, really well for their purpose. I can't remember the name of the song when Veronica shows up kind of the first time, but that's really fantastic. There's, what is that other one called? Sunshine Go Away Today, that they use really well, and that's a song I've just enjoyed. Ironically, it was on the Friends soundtrack, somehow tying Paul Rudd and the Friends back again. But, so again, there's a lot of... I just keep saying and again, and again, and again, and again, and again.
And again.
And again. There's a lot of fun to this soundtrack. I think if you were to purchase this, you'd actually end up listening to the majority of it if you threw it into your CD player.
Yeah, I'm sure there was more to it than I really saw. I mean, overall for me... This is a comedy. It's about the script. Soundtrack didn't really make it into it. I think that they had a great little sort of musical number, which was Afternoon Delight and the jazz flute in there. So I fell on a comfortable 3.
Okay, I'm surprised. I think that was generous. I didn't think you'd be giving it that high. That's actually where I land as well, because I think it is mediocre. But I think that Afternoon Delight is really what bumps it up to a 3 for me. Otherwise, it probably would land on a 2 as fun, but forgettable.
Fair enough. Let's move into progressiveness. Now, I know you mentioned that you have some things to say about it. I didn't have a lot to say about this. I like that it's commentary about equality, but again, you've got a majority whitewash cast.
Yes, certainly a whitewash cast, but I think, again, the credit certainly does go to its portrayal of feminism and female empowerment. Obviously, that's very obvious, right? They're not really hiding that. But what I kind of noticed this watch through that I hadn't really before is how it is also very anti-misogyny. A lot of the absurd lines, the ones that actually make you laugh, are some of the most misogynistic lines. You know, if I were a man, I'd punch you right in the mouth. Or if you were a man, sorry, if I didn't say, yeah, if you were a man, I'd punch you right in the mouth. It's those absurd lines that we laugh at, and I didn't quite realize how much this movie was laughing at toxic masculinity and that concept until I've learned what that was through my lifetime since 2004 when this movie came out. So this is one that it's rare that we get to say this. I feel this is one that the progressiveness actually improves with age because of the perspective that we have now. I think we look back and go, man, this movie was really actually calling some right shots 15 years ago.
And I think it's important that it's calling those things out and it's meant to be ridiculous. It's like, how can this have happened? How could people have been treated this way? And it's so ridiculous now that it's funny, but at one point it wasn't. That was the reality, right? And some of the things that are said are super misogynistic, and but they are funny now because of this, and they were funny at the time because we grew up in a culture, in a society, us luckily, where we didn't experience these things as two dudes as well, and two white guys. Like, this never was a problem for us. But certain lines like, "You're a real hooker, I'm gonna slap you in public,"
yeah, you and your dirty whore mouth. And so I looked into this to see, obviously this movie couldn't have an impact on the real world. So I looked up when the first female anchor was, and would you believe it was 1976? So again, 1 year before this movie was actually set. And I didn't know this, but it's Barbara Walters. The first ever female co-anchor on an evening news program was Barbara Walters. Her co-host was Harry Reasoner, and apparently, dude was just like as bad as Ron Burgundy is to Veronica in this movie. Their very first interview with her, he asked her to justify why she was getting paid as much as she was. Wow. In their very first on-air interview. Like, that's insane that this woman had to put up with that. And again, years later, like, it's a famous story that this guy and how abusive he was to her.
But it's good that I know exactly who Barbara Walters is, and I don't know who the fuck that guy is.
Yeah, exactly, right? Harry Reasoner, never heard of you. Barbara Walters, we love you. But this was the fact that blew my mind. That was the first female co-anchor on an evening news program. The first solo female anchor on a news program in the evening, Katie Couric, in 2006. That's 2 years after this movie came out.
Wow, really? I didn't know that.
How insane is that? That we're talking 13 years ago for the first solo female news anchor.
That's crazy. It's stuff like that that really reminds you that, like, this was a real problem. Like, even after this movie was made, when it was throwing, jokes about this, it still was a real problem.
It's a real thing that the world is dealing with. And I mean, I know there's people who like to look now and, hey, we've solved this, right? But it's very clear, like, we haven't. This is only 13 years ago. We're still obviously figuring a lot of this out, and we still have a lot of work to go. And I think movies like Anchorman, it's a dumb comedy, but it actually has a real point to make, and I think more people would benefit from paying attention to that side of this movie than just the laugh side, which, again, don't get me wrong, the laughs are fantastic. But this movie had a lot to say, and I think says it well.
I think you've just upped my score a little bit. I'm going to land on a 4 for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a 4.5 for me.
Oh, good.
The only thing, as you say, that knocks it down is, again, very whitewashed cast, so...
All right. So that's our score for progressiveness. Let's move into the overall summary. Again, we always talked about how our other scores in the rest of the categories don't really impact our overall enjoyment of this movie. Scott, where did you land on your overall score?
I had a lot of fun revisiting this movie, and again, I think the way it talks about the progressiveness, the way it has evolved over time to actually be a better film, I land on a 4.5 for this. Anchorman is just an absolute blast. I will revisit this one again. Next time I have friends over, it may just be, hey, when was the last time you watched Anchorman? Because you should watch it again. I think with a 2019 mindset, this is, again, somehow a fresh movie.
Amazing. Now, this movie for me was actually funnier than I remembered. I remembered as being funny, but it wasn't like one of my favorites. This movie is hilarious. It's landing on a 4 for me because I always talk about, am I going to watch this movie again? And just like you said, this likely will be on again soon.
Yeah, within the next 6 months, I would say I expect to watch Anchorman again. Fantastic. Ed, I think we've hit a really good rationale with this one. I'm surprised, honestly, with Anchorman. I expected to come in... I was pretty much expecting blanket 3s across the board for, it's good, but it's nothing special. But this movie really caught me off guard, so I'm really glad we dived into Anchorman this week.
Great. Well, I agree. This one was just funny, and I had fun with it. I watched it all the way through, and if you want to ask, does a movie hold up even as for a comedy? This one does. If you haven't watched it recently, watch it again.
And with that brings us to the end of another episode of Does It Hold Up with Anchorman. Let us know what you guys thought of this episode somewhere on the internet. I've been Scott Mason.
And I've been Edgard. Go fuck yourself, San Diego.